Hello everyone, welcome back to another painting video. Today we're doing a beach scene, kind of a coastal view with some flowers in the foreground. I really love this kind of scenery, and maybe you've noticed in some of my other paintings, I paint this type of scene quite a lot. The challenge for me with this one is definitely the rocky coastal area. I think it's always a tricky part to capture, but I start from the top as always, laying down the base colors for the sky. And for this one, I just lay down a lot of base colors first and then add the details later. That way it'll be easier to build everything up from there. As you can see, for the sky color, I'm mixing my Prussian blue with a lot of white and just blending it a little to create a soft gradient. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. That's the sky done, super simple, no need to overthink it. For the ocean, I'm mixing Prussian blue with a bit of yellow-green because I want that slightly greenish tone in the water. I'm also adding some white to lighten it up a bit. That way it'll be easier later when I add the shadows and highlights. As we get closer to the sand area, I'm adding more white to the ocean color because that's where there are more waves, so the water looks lighter there. Now I'm mixing mid yellow and a bit of red, then adding some white to create the sand color. But I realized it's a bit too vibrant, so I'm going back in with more white to tone it down. As you can see, we're moving pretty fast, but feel free to pause the video anytime. I recorded this at 4 times the speed, so don't worry about keeping up. Now I'm mixing black with red. That's going to be the color I use for the rocky cliff. It's basically the shadow color, and we'll add the highlights later. For now, I'm just laying down the base colors first, so it's easier to see what to do next. I'm also mixing some yellow-green into the mix and putting it on top of the rocky cliff shadow we just painted. Just laying down the color there. It's just one flat color for now, but don't worry, the details will come later. And there's also a farther area in the coastal hill, so I'm painting that part blue like I see in the reference. I've really been enjoying this type of painting lately. You know, just laying down all the base colors first. It's so much easier to work from there. I should have done this way earlier instead of trying to paint everything. The shadows, the highlights all at once. That's just, you know, kind of time consuming and a bit hard to do. It overwhelms me really fast. And for the grass area, I'm just laying down a mix of black and red because I noticed in the reference that part has kind of like a brownish shadow. Now that all areas are already painted, I'm going to start adding the details. There's not much detail on the farthest coastal hill. I'm just adding a bit of white and lightly brushing it on the bottom part of that blue area. For the shadow on the green area along the coast, I'm mixing my earlier green mixture with a bit of Prussian blue and just marking out the shadows based on the reference. For the highlight in that area, I'm mixing my green with a bit of red to tone it down, then adding some white to lighten the color. That's going to be the highlight for the green area along the coast. I also feel like the shadow there isn't dark enough, so I'm adding a second layer of shadow, but not covering the first one completely, just to give it a bit more depth. Then I'm going back to my green mixture and adding more white to create the second highlight. For the rocky base of the hill, I'm mixing red and yellow to make the highlight, but I realized it turned out a bit too light. I never ended up fixing it after I finished the paintings because once I got all the details done, I kind of overlooked this area and just moved on. But you guys can always make the color a bit darker and gradually build up the highlight from there. Following what I did is fine too. This piece still turned out okay anyway. Now I'm mixing a little bit of Prussian blue with the sand mixture from earlier to create that wet area on the sand. Now I'm switching to my liner brush and using pure white to start adding details to the ocean, painting the foam where the waves meet the sand and the foamy part of the waves near the shore. Painting these foamy parts is actually really fun because the painting is finally starting to look like something. After finishing the foam with pure white, I'm mixing Prussian blue with a bit of white to create a darker shade. I'm using that to paint underneath the foam, kind of as the shadow for those areas. Now I'm also mixing the darker mixture to add texture to the ocean. Now I'm painting my favorite part, the grass area in the foreground. I'm adding shadows on top of the darker base color we put down earlier. For the shadows, I'm using like almost pure black to really deepen the depth in the area. Now it's time to gradually build up the color in the grass area. I'm mixing yellow-green with a bit of red. That's going to be the first layer. We'll slowly build up the color from there. But as you can see, it's not super bright yet. We'll add more highlights later so the depth becomes more apparent. I keep mixing yellow-green with red and layering it on top, but as it gets brighter, make sure not to apply it everywhere. Otherwise the painting might look flat. We're only picking certain areas for this highlight. Now I'm going to add the final highlights for the grass, this bright color right here. I'm really carefully choosing where to put it, making sure I don't end up putting it everywhere. Now I'm mixing red with medium yellow. This is for the flowers. I'm settling on this color right here. In this grassy area, there are two types of flowers. One of them is this color. I'm mixing red with Prussian blue, which creates kind of like Byzantine shade. I'm placing these flowers in certain spots in the foreground. Now I'm mixing the shadow for the orange flowers we already painted. It's just a darker shade of the same color, and I'm applying it to the bottom of each flower so the depth starts to show. I want the shadow a bit darker, so I'm adding a little black and only applying it to certain flowers. For the same orange flowers, I'm making the highlight mixture, the red and mid yellow from earlier, but adding more white to make it very light. I'm placing the highlight on certain parts of the flowers, but not everywhere, again to avoid the painting looking flat. Now it's time to add the highlights for the purple flowers we painted earlier. I'm mixing in some white with the earlier mixture and then adding more white for the second highlight. Finally, I'm also adding another layer of white for the third and final highlight. And that's it for the flowers, and we're done. And that's it for today's painting. The print for this piece, as always, will be in the description. I really enjoyed working on this one. Well, not completely because it was kind of like overwhelming. But I really like this tape I just bought. It's pretty cheap, but look at it. I can peel it off so effortlessly. It doesn't damage my paper and the edges looks great. That's it for today, guys. Hopefully see you again soon. Inshallah, bye bye.